We've got a lot of exciting Mario Kart World news, updates, and information to cover today because Nintendo just recently released a in-depth Ask the Developer 4-part interview, which I will have linked in the description down below because there is a ton of information in here, way too much to cover every single line of text in one video, but I do want to go over the highlights and all the new details we learned from that article, in addition to first diving into just some really cool snippets of gameplay that we have not seen up to this point in time, such as some specific challenges in free roam mode, a more detailed look at a variation of just collecting coins, which is mainly what we've seen up to this point in time, and we also have a more detailed look at that as well. And it was a few days back, but we also have a nice look at the full-on binocular system that I want to highlight briefly within Mario Kart World, and it gets me that much more excited to go look at all of the terrain that we're going to be able to explore. We know to expect some pretty exciting remixes of classic Mario era tracks now, and just a whole host of developer comments on this game, their mindset with it, even one comment playing into the idea on whether or not we will see them return to a numbered installment for Mario Kart ever in the future. So we're going to unpack all of these details, but before we do, make sure you like, subscribe, and turn on your bell notification to join Sunbro Nation if you're new here. And I want to first kick it off with a quick look at something from the Nintendo Today app that was just posted in terms of a P-Switch challenge that is different than the other ones we got a chance to look at so far. I personally am very excited for free roam mode, as I do tend to like a single player version or just something to do in single player on games when I'm not playing with friends or online. It is nice to break up the pace of VS races, Grand Prix races, and of course Knockout Tour that I'm planning to hop into and spend a decent amount of time in with this installment, but I'm sure I'm going to get my money's worth out of free roam mode as well. And one of the big things, of course, a highlight of free roam mode is the challenges systems, and we now have kind of some new footage you can see on screen now where not only are you playing as our cow friend, but you also have a P-switch that you hit where legitimately the entire screen gets filled up with cows and you have to navigate through them. Now, they are not doing any kind of advanced run through or anything like that, but I will say that there's not much room for error in this trial, which is what I like to see. The developers do actually comment on trying to keep this game neutral for new players to be able to easily understand it and hop into it, but also have some level of challenge and difficulty in there. And I will say that this particular trial is kind of exciting whenever you sit down and see that. And we also know that the P-switches are not just automatically going to be a collect a coins type of situation like we've seen for the most part so far, which on that coin note real quickly, we did get a snippet of gameplay that I don't believe we've seen this long of a snippet of this same type of clip, where Baby Peach is actually going through the blue coin challenge from the P-switch, and we just get a more detailed look at some of the, grind rail platforming that will have to take place in order for you to complete that challenge. And the fact that there's probably going to be hundreds of these spread all throughout the map of Mario Kart World, that's definitely adding in, some of that reason to go explore and have fun in this game. And I do think that the interconnected world in free roam mode makes a ton of sense. We also are learning a little bit more about the start menu that it seems like not everybody is a fan of online. I'm not expecting very much from a start menu, but it seems like it's going to be a very quick, you pretty much hit that L and R button and you are hopping right into either free roam mode, or you will of course have the ability to go through the menu system and select any other type of gameplay mode that you would like. But we also had not quite as brand new as everything else that's covered in this video, but something of a look at the binocular system that is in Mario Kart World now, where you do have a clip from the Nintendo Today app where Toad goes up to one of these binocular stations where you can look around the world for essentially things to do. Of course, you're going to be looking for things like P-switches and just all of the different hidden items that you can find. What is interesting on the note of the items too is that we do actually see in real time an airplane going through and dropping those from its cargo essentially, and that's how we actually have some of those item blocks appearing on the map, it appears, because they're basically on a parachute type of catch system, and it's just nice to see that those drop into place and maybe even lead you along a path that you otherwise wouldn't have gone. Kind of like a hint, there might be something worth exploring over here. There is a look at the very end of the clip with some zebras running around, so nice new gameplay snippets we hadn't previously seen. And then I want to transition into some of what the developers have said about this game and the dialogue they had to add around it, because some really interesting tidbits of information have come out of this, where first the first question here is, I'd like to ask about the title first. Was it always the plan to call it Mario Kart World rather than Mario Kart 9? And the response here is interesting because it will put a lot of talk online to bed. It says, if the idea had just been to add more courses, then I think we would have called it Mario Kart 9. But that wasn't our approach this time. We wanted to take the series to the next level, so we decided to drop the numbering this time and go with a completely new title, Mario Kart World. So we'd already added Mario Kart World to the concept from the early stages of development. So what is interesting there is a lot of people, including myself, did not know if Nintendo kind of considered Mario Kart Tour to be Mario Kart 9, aka we would never see something officially titled like Mario Kart 9, but that appears not to be the case. And in terms of the reason why, which could play into whether or not Nintendo ever goes back to the old formula, but you can also see this tidbit of information which says, I also felt that with Mario Kart 8 Deluxe, we pretty much perfected the formula of a Mario Kart game where each course is played separately. In that sense, I felt that a Mario Kart game where you play in an interconnected world would also be rewarding from a developer perspective. However, from a player perspective, it can sometimes feel particularly disappointing when a sequel changes too many things. So as someone involved in game development, I felt that our first challenge was to figure out how to add new elements while still making it satisfying for those who've played previous Mario Kart games. Diving further into that, the interviewer asks, I see it seems like everyone felt this was a major change of direction for Mario Kart. What kind of things in particular did you keep in mind when planning and moving forward with this new title? I think people who played the series up to now are looking for a Mario Kart game that feels familiar to them, so we wanted to make sure we preserved that. This game has some new features like wall ride and rail ride, but we wanted to make sure you could still have fun playing with just the basic controls without using these new techniques. We implemented and adjusted features with the goal of gathering up all the best bits from past Mario Kart games. During development, Yabuki-san kept saying, well, that's how we did it in the past game, almost like it was his catchphrase. Due to it being an interconnected world, we had to remake all kinds of features, and we're often discussing whether features from the last game should stay the same or be changed. This time we refreshed the tools used to create the game, so everything, even the programming systems, has been rebuilt from scratch. But Yabuki-san insisted that not only the programs and the tools be remade from scratch, but that they should also be capable of producing the same level of quality seen in previous games. Onto some visual design elements, you have Ishikawa saying, on the other hand, the direction of the visual design changed drastically. For Mario Kart 8, based on the concept of vehicles transforming to be like hovercrafts, we opted for futuristic and sophisticated design, whereas in this game, since you're driving through all types of locations in the world, we wanted to convey the feeling of adventure. We also wanted to create a lively, bustling atmosphere even in a vast world, and we were talking about how we wanted to recapture that feeling from Super Mario Kart, the first title in the series. During those discussions, someone on the team mentioned the key phrase, playfulness, and so a lot of their mindset was around creating a Super Mario Kart experience once again, kind of that first time wow, that playfulness, that new joy from having a new type of kart racer, and they even have some specific key art illustrating how they decided to go to a more rounded, fun looking, almost cartoonish, fun, light design compared to the more sophisticated look that was in Mario Kart 8 Deluxe. Now, one big piece of information that came out from this interview was the fact that they were originally developing this for the original Nintendo Switch, and that was seriously hindering their overall creative view and what they could pull off with the game. And you can see some of that detail here where Sato says, when we were developing for the Nintendo Switch system, it was difficult for us to incorporate everything we wanted. So we were always conscious of what we were giving up in return. We discussed things like toning down the visuals, lowering the resolution, and we even considered dropping the frame rate to 30 FPS in some cases. It was a tough situation. So what did you decide to give up in the end? And they all kind of laughed that they did not give up anything. Yabuki details, we worked on it while kicking the can down the road in terms of deciding what to give up on. So at some point we knew it was going to get messy, but we decided to release Mario Kart 8 Deluxe Booster Course Pass. We thought this would give us a bit more time to continue development. That's when the conversation of moving it up to the Nintendo Switch 2 system came up, and this suddenly opened up a bunch of possibilities on what we could do. It was truly a ray of hope. The interviewer asked, when did you decide to move development of this game to Nintendo Switch 2? And they said it was first brought up around 2020. Back then, we already had an idea of the next system's expected specs, but it wasn't until a bit later that we actually received working development units. Until then, we just had to proceed with development based on provisional estimates. The interviewer says, I see you had to use your imagination while developing the game, and Sato replies, When we were developing for Nintendo Switch, we often were worried whether we could find the right balance between planning and performance. Of course, the Switch system's performance is sufficient for developing different kinds of games, but if we had to include everything we wanted to in this game's vast world, then it wouldn't have run at 60 FPS and would have suffered from constant frame rate drops. I think there were a lot of people on the team who were worried about whether we could really manage it, but once we decided to release this game on Switch 2, we expected our worries to evaporate all at once. I remember being overjoyed when I discovered we could express even more than we'd originally set out to. With the move to Nintendo Switch 2, you were able to implement things you couldn't previously. On the other hand, didn't that mean you needed to do a lot more than before? That's right, of course the graphics needed to be more detailed, but like Sato-san, I also felt like it was outweighed by a sense of relief. From the beginning, the designers were saying they wanted to make the art richer, so I thought we could achieve that now. For example, team members who were creating the terrain and scenery were really happy because they could now place more trees, which were key to giving the world a more natural look. And they provide some different concept artwork. It's just kind of an interesting look to see where these games start out at, where with your time of day, obviously, and real world weather being a factor in this game. They also quickly detail kind of the food system and how the designer was kind of happy to basically have a wide variety of different food types to design. And of course, we know that these are going to unlock various costumes in the game. And it looks like there are like 3 variations of pretty much all these foods. They almost level up and get more complex. So you kind of get a look into that. There was also a look, or rather a brand new listen at some returning music if you are a classic Mario fan. And as I'll let you hear directly. And you just gotta love Super Mario Bros. 3 Remix. That's a huge one for my nostalgia, but cool to hear what they're doing with the soundtrack in this game. And they did detail that we should be expecting a lot of returning tracks remixed in a similar fashion. So that's obviously great for long-term fans of the series. And they also detail some of the P mission stuff we talked about earlier, where it says, unlike traditional courses where we've accumulated a lot of know-how, the P-Switch missions were our first attempt in this game at something like this. So we particularly valued the feedback we got from those players who played them. We got plenty of people who aren't good at Mario Kart to actually play it. And we were like, yep, we thought this part might be challenging. By repeating this process, we made improvements so even those less familiar with the game can enjoy this title. But I do still think there's going to be a number of P-Switch challenges out there that you really have to time things right on. And all this new information is pretty exciting to me. I'm very glad that Nintendo did choose to do this as a Nintendo Switch 2 exclusive game and not have the power constraints of the Switch 1 hold back a creative vision for the follow-up to a game that, quite honestly, since it's been 2014, essentially since the original Mario Kart 8 came out, you know, we're talking over 11 years that we've been technically playing the same base Mario Kart game since this new one will come out. So obviously high expectations for it, a high price tag as well, mind you, but this is one that I'm very excited to check out on my Nintendo Switch 2 on day one. So let me know in the comments down below what you think of all the new roundup of information we've learned about this game so far. What mode do you plan on hopping into first if you are picking this up as a launch game for Nintendo Switch 2? And what kind of hopes do you have for maybe DLC content that we will no doubt see announced at some point in the future for this title? So make sure you share all your thoughts and feelings in the comments down below before you leave, regardless if we agree or disagree. Also make sure you like, subscribe, turn your notification bell. And with that, I've been Sunbro, you've been Nation. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.